Alright, so a couple of people wanted me to cover the latest updates on Fate Lost Einherjar. As you know, I was doing the profiles for Fate Strange Fate, but I had to switch up gears real quick because you know that we're on that. Last time I covered this, it was about 6 months ago. We only had the prologue at the time, and now they finally released the first book. Now, I do want to come out and say up front that I did have to go through jank translations in order to do this. The community is still translating the book, it's that new. But I was still able to get the gist of it anyway. And like people were saying at that time, the characters weren't finalized. We also had a post from Shiro Miwa, who's the main artist for the novel, and he also said that they were still finalizing productions for it. So some of the characters may not show up, some of the characters may show up later, but a lot of things have been changed around since then. Again, it is a Scandinavian war, it's in Norway, and it centers around the Viking king Ragnar. Same timeline as Apocrypha, but 10 years later. So we kick it off with Ragnar being in the middle of Norway, and he's in a bookstore just blowing time. And he's got his headphones in. He always keeps his iPod Nano with him. He loves listening to Scandinavian heavy metal, which I thought was fire because some of my favorite bands are also heavy metal, Disturbed, Megadeth. So that's his thing. And a kid walks up to him with a book that has a Viking on it. Now, considering that it's the 21st century, Vikings are more so a thing of the past. He's looking at the book and then he's looking at Ragnar and he's starting to draw parallels. And he straight up comes out the bag and tells him, he's like, yeah, I am a Viking. And of course, nobody's gonna believe him because why would they? But little did he know he was telling the truth. So he goes outside and then he starts to sense a presence that's similar to his. And he goes into the nearby alleyway to check on what it actually is. He looks around, doesn't see anything, and then the moment that he starts to turn, he gets smacked dead in the center of the face. And this creature turns out to be a monster, a Slavic monster that's nearly 10 feet tall. It has its own bounded field. There's a wind barrier that's around it that normally would cancel out some attacks from ordinary humans. Unfortunately for him, Ragnar isn't ordinary, nor is he human. The monster starts to bounce off the walls in the alleyway at 500 kilometers per hour in random directions, trying to confuse him, and then it tries to attack him with his claws. Ragnar goes straight through his wind barrier with one arm, and then he pulls up his axe and slices the entire being in half with just one strike. He gets rid of it, and then he puts his axe up right after and starts to tell his master about what's going on. Going back into the heavy metal, he actually carries his axe in a guitar case, so although people might not realize it because it looks normal, he's always ready. So he starts to communicate with his master about what happened telepathically, this being Raymina Igmalenia. She was a part of the Igmalenia family. Raymina or Laymina, both are correct on the site. And that's how he finds out that it's a creature from Slavic myth, and it must have come from a spellcaster. Well, later on in the story, toward the end, we get a deeper look on one of the teams that's in the war, and that's caster and assassin. By the way, this is the double Holy Grail war. It's the first dual Grail war where two servants are summoned instead of one. So we're looking at the scene with caster and assassin, the assassin being an unnamed Hassan, but the caster is a real point of interest. Now, when I first heard about her, people were saying, hey, this is Baba Yaga, and I'm like, there's no way that y'all know this is Baba Yaga already and it just came out. And that was before I actually seen the picture of her. But if you really look at the scene and the context of the scene, everything in it points to her being Baba Yaga. I believe this is truly Baba Yaga. For one, Baba Yaga is from Slavic myth, so that would run right into her summoning that creature. She's also in Russian myth. Some other things is her appearance, her mannerisms, the way that she talks. Baba Yaga was supposed to be a witch. She would ride around, abduct, cook, and eat her victims, sometimes these even being children. She would ride around on a magical mortar with her broomstick close by, and her house was said to be a hut with chicken legs coming out of it. And if you look in the background, you see the hut, and you can very faintly see the legs coming out of the hut. To me, the hut is radiating as if it's actually alive, and if you look at her real myth, it's said that there's bright windows that's supposed to function as its eyes. You know, if that wasn't enough, you have the fact that she's in the caster class, you have the fact that her master Joanne has already won a Grail war in the past, it would make a lot of sense with her already winning a war that she would go to great odds to summon such a spirit. And if you're wondering about her leg, this is something that's happened in story. She said that she replaced one of her own legs and turned it into a magical tool, one that she hasn't delved into yet. After chopping it up with his master, Ragnar then rendezvous with his partner. This is, of course, his third and final wife from the real myth, Aslog. They've both been summoned together under Raymina. Now, I know a lot of people were waiting to see Ragnar's three wives meet up and see all the chaos and commotion that would come out of that, but as it turns out, Aslog claims that she doesn't remember Ragnar. She says that she doesn't know who he is. And on his end of the spectrum, he doesn't recognize or remember himself to be king. So that's kind of what the story builds upon. Both of their identities have been stripped to a certain degree, and they're kind of building it back up in the story in front of the audience. Ragnar constantly hammering down that he's going to marry her and make her his wife. They roll up to Oslo City Hall, Oslo being the capital of Norway, and they realize that a servant is there. Ragnar is checking in with Raymina, asking him how he should handle the situation. And she's basically telling him, look, I understand that he's a knight and all, and attacking somebody by surprise is morally unethical, but bump all that, we trying to win. Do it anyway. So he went through with it. Once the servant went up to the roof of the city hall, you had Ragnar just try to dunk on him out of nowhere. The servant straight up blocked it. Very powerful blow. This should have not only knocked his guard loose, but it should have knocked him back as well. The servant didn't even budge. In fact, he had Ragnar suspended in midair. I'm like, yo, it's time for plan B. But Ragnar wasn't finished yet. He then goes in for a barrage of hits, 14 high-speed axe swings, all of them going for his vitals. His head, his neck, his arteries, his heart, and the servant blocked every single one of them. You know, I take that back. That plan is still in effect. And the servant is a lancer. He responds with 2 hits from both sides of his spear. He swept Ragnar off of his feet, and then with the other side, he tried to hit his head, nearly decapitating him. And at that point, Raymina is asking, well, how's it going? He's actually pretty strong. And then she asked him, well, what does he have? And he tells her, and she immediately says, oh, that's Percival. Run. like she wasted no time. She didn't say think about it. She immediately said, oh, that's Percival, like Knight of the Round Table Percival. Hit the road, vanish, vamonos, Andale. And one of the main reasons for this is because Percival wields the Holy Spear Longinus, the same spear that pierced Jesus Christ. And they start talking about the spear, and Aslaug is in the back asking what's the difference between a holy spear and a magical one. And at that point, the person that was over Percival calls her stupid. How could you not know that? So multiple reasons why she asked this. Again, Aslaug is a demigoddess. Her mother is Brynhildr. So her standard for a spear that's super legendary is something like Gungnir, the spear of Odin, which is literally like one of the best spears to ever exist. Another thing is that, like I brought up before, her memories appear to be fragmented, not just in this moment, but in several other parts of the story as well. It's almost like she doesn't know who she is at times. But regardless, this had her on hots, and in a few seconds, Aslaug just fired a supersonic arrow straight at Percival. I mean, this was so out of pocket that it even grazed Ragnar's shoulder. Then she starts to hit him with a second wave, dozens of magical arrows, and she's smoking out the entire rooftop. The smoke disperses, and we find out that Percival blocked every single one of them out of the second wave. Not a single scratch was on him. This time he had to deflect it with his shield. At that point is when the person with him decided to retreat. She jumps onto his shoulder, and Percival leaps directly into the air. When he jumps into the air, a magical shadow covered ship appears out of nowhere. It was similar to Gil opening his gate of Babylon, and Percival jumps onto the ship, and they all disappear the same way. We come to find out later on that this was actually Percival's partner, Sinfiali. He's a servant in the rider class, and the entire ship was his noble phantasm. The ship allows him to jump between the present and the netherworld like he's teleporting. The story also says that he's literally jumping between between the textures of the planet when he does this, and he does it at a very high speed. So he can teleport and appear right behind you, appear in front of you, above you, you name it. Then we find that this is actually Aslog's uncle, and he's the half brother of the servant Sigurd. The ones who are over these servants are the Istore siblings, or the Istore brother and sister. Gagum Istore, who is the actual master, being the brother, and Mamel Istore, who operates as the assistant, being the sister. At that point in time, they had only met the sister. And I do want to point out that they're not true brother and sister, they're only siblings in title, and it's because they share the same great grandfather. Fast forward, and Raymina, Ragnar, and Aslog are walking through the city. They realize that something has Aslog's attention, which really puts them on alert because Aslog isn't really vocal. So if something has her attention, it must be serious. They run to find out what it is, and it's a waffle shop. Aslog wants waffles. Really? So Raymina, not making it a big deal, she ends up doing her a solid and they all eat at the waffle shop. It even tells us that Aslog ended up eating every waffle in the shop because she's never tried them. $300 worth of waffles. In her defense, waffles do be hidden. You had Raymina pointing out how she was jealous that a servant could eat whatever they want and it wouldn't affect their body. So Aslog is just in there stuffing her face. The next thing you know, Raymina looks up while they're eating and sees the Astore siblings on the other side of the shop. When I tell you Raymina was in there sweating bullets, we were not prepared for this. And then of course you had the siblings deciding to formally reintroduce themselves, basically taunting Raymina, but they made no hints at making any actual advances. It was really Gagum just trying to size her up. They leave and we later end up with a scene that has Raymina. Now Raymina, like I mentioned before, is from the Igmalenia family. She really wants to restore the glory to the Igmalenia name after what happened in the Great Grail War in the Apocrypha. You know, she has a lot of love for her brethren, Kaulis, Gordolf, and especially their former leader, Darnik. She looks up to him. At the same time, she's kinda out here by herself. She does still keep in contact with them, but as far as herself, she's out here rocking dolo. As far as her abilities go, and this is basing it off of what she said and what we've seen, she's not bad, but she's not that great either. So she's more of the type of person to lean towards the calculating side more than anything, because she's already aware of her weaknesses. That in mind, there was a scene where she really wanted to find out other things about Percival. Now that she knows that that servant is Percival, she's doing some digging, she's taking the data that she has and she's sending it to Kaulis, another member from the family. He also took part in the war that was in Apocrypha. If you remember, he was the master of Frankenstein. So Kaulis is extremely intelligent and he does a lot of studies on merging magecraft with technology. As a matter of fact, in this very scene, it also implies that he may have been the person that created Codecast, because as far as we know, he's the only one that's aware of it. She even mentions that he had to collaborate with the Atlas Academy in order to create this, but he's the one that brought them the actual idea. This is Atlas Academy we're talking about, a branch of the association that's entirely full of geniuses, and he's the one that brought them the idea. If you remember Fate Extra, this is when Codecast were first introduced, because Fate Extra operates on a cyber world. It's the 21st century now. On a theoretical timeline, Codecast aren't supposed to exist for another millennium, yet you have Kaulis using one. So it's very likely he is the creator. Basically what a Codecast does is it gives you a spell. You either use or equip the Codecast and get access to that spell temporarily. The machine that Kaulis has is some type of Codecast that allows him to get more information on the servant. So when she gave him the information she had on Percival, he ran that data through the Codecast and starts to reveal new things about him. And this is how we found out about the title. Turns out that Percival has already been in the Grail War 3 times prior to this one. It says that he's been summoned in the Grail War 3 times and he's won every single one of them. Excuse me? This is easily one of my favorite parts of the book, because I'm just sitting there like, Percival did what? I had to read it again to make sure I wasn't tripping. Now don't get me wrong, and going back to my Knights of the Round Table video, I'm already familiar with how strong the Knights are, but at the same time, we didn't really have any information about Percival to go off of. at least in the NA, and this didn't even exist yet, so I had very little to go by. But I was very aware that even some of the worst Knights of the Round Table would still dog walk the average servant. But I didn't know it was this bad. Now I'm sitting there like, I apologize, Percival. I was unfamiliar with your game. This man is dangerous. And I even started to make jokes about it. Either the people that he went against really sucked, or he's out here doing the other teams bad. But you gotta think, for 3 Grail Wars, not counting his teammate, that's at least 15 other people he has to go against. After 15 other people, it's not a fluke. He's really like that. And that's not the only thing that he tells her. He gets even deeper into the specs of Longinus, saying that when he releases the actual Phantasm, it has little charge time, it consumes a small portion of energy, it has a very long range, and it's extremely powerful. The story telling us that if he releases the true name, there's nearly 0 chances of winning. So she thanks him for his help, and she pretty much runs with the information, saying that Carlos is probably somebody that really deserves praise. As far as Raymina herself, her main things are alchemy and elemental conversion. And we know alchemy really isn't even a battle-oriented vein of magecraft. Sure, you can make it work for magecraft, but that's not really what it's for. The Ironsburns are rooted in alchemy, and that's why they had to hire Kirisugu. So she's taking that into account, mentally preparing herself for the things that's ahead of them. She does have her doubts, especially considering what she just heard, but she vows that she's still going to win. So later on down the line, Raymina pulls up to the Oslo Opera House, and this is where the main event for the Grail War is being held. When it comes to the subspecies double Grail War, as opposed to the other Grail Wars where it operates more like a battle royale, this war operates more like a tournament. And opposed to a lot of them keeping the information under wraps, a lot of people actually know about the things that's going on. It's said that there wasn't enough capital for them to have a real Grail War, so a bunch of families from the parts of Europe that the clock tower controls decided to pitch in and host this war instead. So at this war, you have several family members, patrons, people that are from or associated with the clock tower to stand in and watch some of these fights on the big screen. And just from some of the conversations that they had, we know that there are several minor lords in association to the clock tower attending this event. Some of these include Lord Black Raven, Lord Green Tree, Lord Sento, Lord Hato, Midoriki Byakuya, Lord Strategy, and Lord Kakashi. The person that decides to go on stage and send their servants out to fight, they will be rewarded with a command spell early. And the Astore siblings, Gagan specifically, had already used one of his command spells on Percival to make him obey orders. So he decided to go ahead and fight first, and he got one of his command spells back, making it 3 again. And of course, giving him a fine advantage. Raymina decides, since she already knows what her enemy is capable of, that she should go ahead and swallow her pride and fight him first. So she goes up to match him immediately. We find out that Gagan specializes in necromancy, and he starts to transform one side of his entire face. His pupils start to expand vertically, and his skin starts to become scaly, almost looking like a lizard man. It's been implied by the audience that this is a part of his necromancy, and he was merging with some type of reptilian spirit. And if you look closely, Mimel has these hard eyes when he starts to make this transformation. I don't know what type of obsession you got going on, but keep it to yourself. And Mimel basically starts to go on a rant, telling Raymina that she's not gonna win, you might as well give it up, my brother is going to clear you. And Raymina said, I'm about sick of you, I'm gonna need you to shut up talking to me. And Mimel was just in shock, like she couldn't believe it. It was so funny because it was like a direct shift in character, because at first she wasn't gonna say anything. You know, she's more on the reserve side, she's trying to keep her composure, but in her head she was like, you know what? Fuck her. And she just let her have it. What she didn't know is that Raymina got that dog in her. So one of the main rules is that you're not supposed to kill the master, at least for the time being. The big screen shows exactly where your servants need to be in the city. So they had both of the servants from their respective teams pull up. And the thing about this is that they have to be ready in that moment, and everybody knows where you are. So it's Ragnar and Oslog versus Percival and Sinfiali. Now, as I mentioned before, Sinfiali Sinfiali's phantasm is truly hopping the textures on the planet, and the story tells us that it's like he has the presence concealment skill. When he disappears and goes to the netherworld, it's like he never existed, so you can't detect where he's going or where he is until he's already there. Right off the bat, they hop up in his ship and appear behind Ragnar and Aslog, Sinfiali coming with a surprise attack. Ragnar tries to block it with his axe, and Sinfiali catches the entire thing in his claw hands. Then he follows this up with a devastating blow to Ragnar's chest, crushing several of his ribs and rupturing his organs, then kicks him countless meters through the air. Now, one thing about Aslog is that she knows how to fly. Again, she is a demigoddess and the last Valkyrie, so she has many blessings. Another one being her lyre. She carries a lyre that can actually transform to a bow and a spear. Yes, you heard me, a spear. Truly fitting for the archer class. But at the fight, we find something new. She can also transform her lyre into wings and make herself go even faster. So naturally, she pulls out her wings and goes up to catch Ragnar because he can't fly, and he's just barely able to catch on. He's riding on her wings, holding on for his life. And Percival, on top of him being able to fire his true phantasm, the spear Longinus can actually shoot back-to-back waves of energy. So he's just spamming energy slashes all at Ragnar and Aslog like a machine gun. Going back to the people that are watching the war, these guys are treating it like a real sport. They're even betting on the teams. So there's 5 different ranks to the bets, this being iron, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum being the highest, and they can place chips on whatever team that they want to. Before the fight even kicked off, the lords had already bet 5 gold chips on the Istore just based off of their name. Raymina tells us that 1 gold chip is worth $1 million, so they bet 5 million on their team before they even saw anything, and now they're seeing them get the upper hand and they're starting to bet even more on them. And then the sponsor gets 10% of all of these bets. Mina's nearly about to pass out just hearing these types of numbers. Man, with all that money, I could take trips to Paris, buy all the chocolates I want, buy all the clothes I want. Must be nice. And one of the lords threw a curveball saying that he wants to bet on the new girl. He wanted to bet on Raymina. And then everybody just bust out laughing. It was a joke. The fuck do I look like? Raymina, they are really trying to play with your name right now. Right after this, she said that she remembered his face like she was gonna catch him out back after all of this was over. Nah, you gotta see me for that. So going back to the fight at hand, Percival is still spamming his energy attacks. And another cool thing about Aslog's wings is that they have defensive measures. Any attack that she couldn't completely avoid was just being deflected by her wings. And then Aslog decides to bring them into a forest. The thought process behind this was that if I can't stop them from teleporting, at the very least I can slow them down and make it more difficult for them to maneuver. You also didn't have to worry about casualties of there being people in the forest. But it does her no good. They show up and now Percival is fighting Ragnar mid-air, at that point starting to complement each other on their strengths. And then we cut to another scene where the fight is being watched. This time it's by Assassin and potentially Baba. This is where that scene came from. Right now she's using some type of far-seeing spell that allows her to view remote locations. Could be a variation of a crystal ball, but we do know that Assassin was able to watch this with her. And going back to the statement about the familiar from before, where it's hinted to be hers, you have it basically saying that the spellcaster needs to revalue the strength of the person that took it down. And in this very fight, you have caster saying that she's evaluating the strength of that berserker, saying to herself, no wonder this person is gone. That pretty much tells you right there. But she's still not too bothered because she begins to laugh about it. When it comes to the Hassan, I'm seeing some speculation that it might be the Hassan that uses Zabanya with her hair. Not a bad guess. We really don't have anything else to work with, so at least that's something. So we switch back to the fight. Now Aslog is reinforcing herself with the monoburst. She does have a skill that's higher than monoburst that includes the effect of monoburst in it. This is Inborn Dragon. She can create a pseudo mono reactor in herself for a short amount of time, and I really feel like this is just scratching the surface. So she could already fly fly, and then she reinforced her flight with her wings, and now she's reinforcing the wings with magical energy. So she's moving through the forest at blazing speeds that's hardly even perceivable. Now it's starting to become problematic for Percival and Sinfiali. Sinfiali brought up the fact that they can't just keep abusing the ship to keep up with them, because eventually they'll run out of energy. And Ragnar and Aslaug are now hiding and trying to stall them out. So Percival says, skip the charades, let's just get it over with. And it switches over to their master, Gogum. Now, one thing about his reptilian eye is that it seemingly gives him the ability to view remote locations. If you remember the fight between Semiramis and Mordred in Apocrypha, Mordred's master, Kyrie, did something similar. Kyrie is also a necromancer. He had a portable eye that he could throw into Semiramis's throne room and still be able to see despite him not actually having access to it. This kind of reminds me of the same thing. Once Gogum used his eye to pinpoint their location, he gave it over to Percival and Sinfiali, and Sinfiali goes 10,000 meters directly above where they are. Percival starts to release the true name of his phantasm, Longinus, calling out the names of Sir Balin and Galahad. Then he drops a massive beam on the entire forest, mainly centered on Ragnar and Aslaug. And what they find is that the both of them survive. Turns out that Ragnar has a Nordic garment that protects him from all attacks. This is something that originally belonged to Aslaug, and she gave it to him in myth. Now he has it as a phantasm, and he used it to protect her by standing in front of the blast. It's not actually invincible because he did still receive fatal damage from this, but it does give him heavy resistance, very similar to Karna knocking off 90% of the damage with his armor. Now, one of the things that Raymina pulled when she got access to Percival's information is that after he shoots his phantasm, he likes to go down and land a physical hit in order to confirm the kill. The moment that he did this, she used the command spell to teleport Aslaug right behind Sinfiali, and the rest was history. She blew a hole straight through his chest, finishing his spiritual core and wiping him out of the war. So to go back into Sinfiali, he's an existence that's more similar to Sasaki Kojiro. He's a wraith placed into the body of a wolfman, and he was sent down by Odin to look over his descendant Aslaug, as well as being Sinfiali's niece. Not a big fan of how that went down. Once I found out that he was her uncle, I just knew that somebody was gonna hold back. Either it was gonna be on his side or on her side, cause why else are you there? And that's exactly what happened. But I do feel like his death is going to be a catalyst to bring something else out, so I'm not too bothered about it for the time being. We jump back to around the 9th century. This will be around the time that Ragnar was actually alive, and they're at an old school longhouse cabin. He's with Aslaug, his friend the poet Bragi, and guess who else pulls up? His second wife, his ex-wife Lagertha, in all of her glory. Now, we've already seen her design, but we haven't seen it like this, and I gotta say that she is a 10 out of 10, 10, 10, and 10 again. She's said to be an Amazon, and she used to fight alongside Ragnar on the field. And in the scene, we still get what we wanted. She wasn't familiar with Aslaug at the time, so she's asking about Aslaug. Who is this? You didn't introduce yourself. And she draws a sword to Aslaug's neck. Aslaug is in shock, not because she drew the sword, it's because she had already responded by having the tip of her spear on Lagertha's neck by reflex. We don't play those types of games, but they end up settling it on the spot, and apparently there's no bad blood. She also says that she has no current feelings for Ragnar. So after some conversation, they start to see a great streak of light, and they hear some thunder. They run outside to see what it is, and when they do this, a lightning strike drops right down in front of them and leaves behind an image of a phantom. This phantom, of course, and what you've all been waiting for, is our first official reveal of the Nordic Allfather Odin. Like I mentioned before, Aslaug is Odin's descendant, and he had kept making chants to Ragnar that he doesn't know enough fear in his life because he feels like he can just take the hand of his descendant in marriage, and he hasn't been qualified. So Odin wants to put Ragnar through the ringer. He wants to put him through a series of trials and find out if he's truly valid. And to that, he responds that he will. Super dope design for Odin, at least from the things that we can see. It is Odin, it's only to be expected. But there's one thing about this whole flashback that seems amiss, and that's the continuity. The continuity of these scenes feel like they're off. When the scene starts, it says that it's jumping back to the 9th century. So you would automatically assume, oh, this is a flashback back to the time when Ragnar was alive. But the scene also directly tells you that Ragnar has been asleep for about a day and a half because he's so exhausted from his fight with Percival. So it's almost like instead of sleeping into the present, he slept and shifted to the past. So that's one thing. Then there's another scene. There's a young girl that washes up on the shore with the flaming sword, and she wants to kill Oslog. So what it seems to me is that there's some type of disconnect with time that would explain the reason why she can't remember things, the reason why he can't remember things. You might be wondering, what role does her wolf play in all of this? Well, the wolf did little to nothing throughout the entire book, but what I noticed about the wolf is that he has the same blue eyes as Oslog, and the girl that washed up on the shore is also said to have blue eyes. If you look at the cover for the volume, you can see that same girl right on the front. It's also mentioned that she does have white skin, and if you look at the wolf, it's right next to her face, almost as if they wanted you to see it. Now you go back into the 21st century, and one of the servants of the master Maldheim, she also appears to have those same blue eyes. So I feel like all those characters are in some way connected. The wolf, Oslog, the girl that washed up on the shore, and the unknown servant probably have some ties together. Another thing about this scene is Ragnar's friend, Bragi. Now, Bragi has always been a real sus character. He's named after the son of Odin, and there's some speculation that he may directly be linked to Odin as well. And then there's the fact that one of his eyes are closed, and if you look at Odin, one of his eyes is covered, but it's the opposite. It just feels like foreshadowing. One thing about Odin is that he's always got his crows peering down on the events that's going on to indicate that he's watching. It does it several times throughout the book. When the scene ends, it'll just show that every time that Bragi is in the scene, the crows are present. One of those trials that Odin mentioned had already happened in another quote-unquote flashback. Ragnar, Oslog, and Bragi ended up being trapped in a forest together, and at that time you could hear Odin chanting the same things. Anytime that they tried to leave the forest, lightning would strike the outside where they would try to head out, and they ended up having to fight against a troll, which is a descendant of a giant from the Age of Gods, in order to leave out of the forest. And before he died, Sinfiali was also present. He helped the group take the troll down. How are you in the 9th century flashback and you don't get summoned for another 10 centuries? So every scene that Bragi's in, something weird is happening, and it's making me feel like I need some answers.